Okay, welcome to Satsang this fine day in January of 2026. And today we're going to chatter about chapter 29, and I am that, which is living as life's only purpose. And one of the things I think you notice when we do this is that all of these things that we look at end up being the a point of view headed to the same place. So So if you look at what's going on here, if you talk about meaning uh, being the thing that is both the nature of separateness and identification, right? Then when you get back to living as life's only purpose, that almost seems nonsensical, if you will, right? It's a little like I remember Ramesh when I asked him what was the purpose of consciousness. And the answer, of course, is to reveal itself to itself. And I was always like, that's not, I didn't find that to be a purpose, right? So, so simply living, right? Most of us probably would say living as life's only purpose. That doesn't really make a whole bunch of sense, right? Because the living's already happening. So if living is life's only purpose, then yeah, right, purpose achieved. And in a certain way, that's exactly what he's after. So now what you're going to notice in this one, it's really interesting because he's going after this in this way, the nature of everything that we do in the search is that we hold a concept in a certain way and we ask questions from that concept, all of which are misconceived because of the base concept itself. So what happens in this conversation is a almost a litany of all of the things that one might talk about, including suffering and what a guru and an avatar should look like. I mean, it's all over the questioner gets sent really looking for meaning, and so he's pulling everything out of the toy box in this one. So he starts out and remember the term yoga in these conversations. We would call that the spiritual search. That's typically how yoga in a general way is defined culturally. So he says, what does it mean to fail in yoga? Who is a failure in yoga? That's the first question. Now notice that Maharaj comes back and talks to him as though he were an individual. So it's the coaching starts, the conversation starts. He's going to talk to him as an individual. He said it is only a question of incompletion. He who could not complete his yoga for some reason is called failed in yoga. Such failure is only temporary, for there can be no defeat in yoga. The battle is always won, for it is a battle between true and false, and the false has no chance. So then the questioner goes, well, but wait a minute, who fails, the person, right, or the self, right? And immediately Maharaj says what I just said, which is the question is wrongly put. There is no question of failure, right? So the whole concept of success and failure is just simply a misput question, ultimately, in terms of who we are. Um, and so he goes on to say, it's like traveling along an arduous road in an unknown country. Of all the innumerable steps, there is only the last one which brings you to your destination. Yet you would not consider all previous steps as failures. So when we talk about it that way, we get it, right? But then notice how we slip into the other formation almost that it's so present in our everyday life, success and failure, that even though we can tell a little metaphor or a little story and go, oh, I get that, of course. If it took 100 steps to get to where it is I'm headed, I wouldn't say the first 99 were a failure. Right? We can see that in our mind, and yet we can say that, but most of us don't live that way, right? We get home at night and we're on step 76 and we go, I didn't get there, I'm a failure, right? That's actually the way we live every moment. He said, he said, each brought you nearer to your goal, even when you had to turn back and bypass an obstacle. And this is what he says. He says, learning, discovering, unfolding is your eternal destiny. Life, living is life's only purpose. The self does not identify with success or failure. The very idea of becoming this or that is unthinkable. The self understands that success and failure are relative and related. Learn from both and go beyond. If you have not learned, repeat. So in other words, recognize that success and failure is the warp and weft of life, right? But actually you're on the outside of that. And so the whole point here is to move the one into the witnessing, to the place of watching, that natural place. And the question, he says, what am this is kind of interesting. He says, is who am I to learn? And I think it's supposed to be what am I to learn? And he says to live without self-concern. He says, for this you must know your own true being as indomitable, fearless, and ever victorious. Once you know with absolute certainty that nothing can trouble you but your own imagination, you come to disregard your desires, fear, concepts, and ideas and live by truth alone. Well, what's the truth? Living is life's only purpose, right? Consciousness is revealing itself to itself. It ends up being pure relaxation, which is how he decided to live without self-concern. That would be a definition, I think, of pure relaxation. So then, of course, now what's really interesting, so he's gone through all of that. So the question is, what may be the reason that some people succeed and others fail in yoga? Is it destiny, character, or just another accident? Right. So what he said so far really hasn't set. And it used to remind me of it used because Ramesh would use the kind of concept of no matter what happens, it's what was going to happen, right? So he would talk about some crazy man that went and killed somebody, and when they interviewed him, what did he say? He said, "Well, God made me do it." And Ramesh would go, "He's absolutely right." Of course, that would you could feel the whole satsang when he would say that kind of bristle a bit, and but what was always really interesting is that what he was communicating is that there isn't a you there to do anything. So the happening of consciousness is a happening of impersonality, right? There isn't anything personal going on there. And invariably, the first question back would be, well, then I could just go get a gun and kill anybody I wanted to. And you would just say, No, he kind of got rid of that in the last little piece, that he, but the mind is so locked in to having the how it is that it asks the questions that immediately that would be the first response. And here you have the same thing. I mean, he's already asked that question. He's gotten a whole response, and the question comes back, why is it that some people succeed and others fail in yoga? Same question as the beginning question. And he comes back and he answers it again. He goes, nobody ever fails in yoga. It is all a matter of a rate of progress. It is slow in the beginning and rapid in the end. When one is fully mature, realization is explosive. It takes place spontaneously or at the slightest hint. Then he goes on to say, and I always remember this, I love it that he says this, in my uh, time in India, we would have raging spiritual questions in the ashram. That was pretty typical in Osho land for anybody who was there. And I remember that there was a couple of weeks, and the question that was everybody was about was whether enlightenment was slow or whether it was immediate and fast, right? And I mean, people were arguing about this like they were arguing about their favorite sports team, right? So this is a really nice piece because he comes in, he says, the quick is not better than the slow. Slow ripening and rapid flowering alternate. Both are natural and right. So that's a beautiful little piece for those who want to argue about how enlightenment happens as though there's only one way, right? He said, yet this is so in the mind only. He says, as I see it, there is really nothing of the kind. In the great mirror of consciousness, images arise and disappear, and only memory gives them continuity. And memory is material, destructible, perishable, transient. On such flimsy foundations, we build a sense of personal existence, vague, intermittent, dreamlike. This vague persuasion, I am so and so, obscures the changeless state of pure awareness and makes us believe that we were born to suffer and die. So there's the suffering. Who's suffering? I am suffering, right? So you got to get to pure awareness. Just as a child cannot help growing, the question comes back, so does a man compelled by nature make progress. Why exert oneself, right? Where's the need of yoga? And he goes, there is progress all the time. Everything contributes to progress, but this is the progress of ignorance. So now he's going to tell the story of how it emerges that you can ask the question in a well-formed way, right? He says the circles of ignorance may be ever widening, yet it remains a bondage all the same. We're born to suffer and die. He said, in due course, a guru appears to teach and inspire us to practice yoga, and a ripening takes place as a result of the immemorial, a result of which the immemorial night of ignorance dissolves before the rising sun of wisdom. Great. So there's kind of the progress. And then he stops and he says, but in reality, nothing has happened. The sun is always there. There is no night to it. The mind, blinded by the I am the body idea, spins out endlessly its thread of illusion. So there he's walked somebody right through. He said, if all of is a part of a natural process, where is there a need of effort? Back to the effort, right? He says, even effort's part of it. When ignorance becomes obstinate and hard and the character gets perverted, effort and pain of it become inevitable, right? So now he's speaking to the individual, right? Because in the individual state, effort is felt as effort, right? So when you talk about making an effort, it's always about the effort being made, right, by the individual definition that you carry. And it feels like effort. In separation, it feels like effort. And then he switches over and says, in complete obedience to nature, there is no effort, right? Now, notice how he says that, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to stay with the fact that this person is talking from an individual place. Because you really would never say it like that, right? Think about it for a minute. In complete obedience to nature, there is no effort. That state, there's nobody there to be obedient, right? So what he's done is he's translated it down to the conversation that he's having, right? So he goes,
So Alan, excuse me a second. So,
go for it.
but even the concept of practicing yoga
Yep,
is coming from an ego perspective, an individual perspective.
no doubt about it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it. Right. So, but here's the when you watch what happens, because here's what I'm after is this in the end, this is what he's after. We all walk through life with a conception, inherited conception that we believe is the real thing, right? Then we hear someone talk about the I am and witnessing and seeing it from the outside, and bang, right? It now reveals itself to us. Holy cow, I'm not what I always thought I was. I'm actually something else that's watching it from the outside. Now, here's the problem in the world that we live in, which is we worship the whole sense of intellectuality to such a degree that what we usually do is we don't really include a lot of other stuff. So you go, oh, it's been revealed. I got this, right? But what happens is that conditioning lives in tangibility. I mean, think about your emotional state and all the rest of it. So what most people do is they come to a revelation, and what they don't really see that they're doing is sandbagging because their revelation is this mental revelation only. You've heard of a lot of people that say, hey, Advaita is really kind of a boring, stiff, stale space, right? And my response to that is always like, yeah, if that's what you bring, that's what it is, right? Because it is what you bring, right? So if you bring the whole package, right. And I always talk about the fact that I spent my early days with Osho in a very kind of tantric squeeze life like a lemon world, right? So to me, when I came to Advaita, Advaita was, this squeeze like Advaita looked to me as alive as anything that had ever, had ever been entertained over here. So so when somebody would say that to me, man, it's really dry and intellectual and all the rest of it. Well, luckily, I know I'm not all that intellectual, so I didn't have to make a claim there. But the reality was that I was always kind of baffled by that. Like I didn't see the path as being arid and dry and lacking any kind of tangibility or oomph, right? But we do that. We see our revelations a lot of time as intellectual only. We think, oh, I got it. Right. I mean, think about how we do things in the world, right? You want to teach leadership in the corporate world. You fly some bozo in, he drops in and he tells all these people these nuggets of wisdom for a day, and they say, oh my God, I've got it. And they run out the next day and they try to apply all that crap in the workplace. And it takes them about 22 minutes to go, this is not working, right? Because the mental dropping of concepts does not translate into life as it arises and is lived. That's on the dual level. I'm not talking about the pure awareness and witnessing. I'm just talking about how it happens there. That has to be accounted for. So you have to account for that yourself. So that's why the concept, as he talks about it, that's why he's making that particular point. And of course, I mean, there's a lot of other dangers that the intellect brings along that I'm sure we'll wander into. But that's what he's talking about. So in complete obedience to nature, there is no effort. In other words, one is simply lived in the moment, right? And so now the next thing is this questioner lives on the outside, lives and looks to the outside. So now he's trying to figure this outside world out, and Maharaj keeps kind of handing it back to him and saying there is no outside world. That's the key here. And he keeps saying, but wait a minute. He says, we come across some great people who in their old age become childish, petty, quarrelsome, and spiteful. How could they deteriorate so much? Well, the good news, a lot of us were childish, petty, quarrelsome, and spiteful from the beginning, so we don't have to worry about the fact that we've grown into that. But so that happens. He says, so he goes on, and all Maharaj says is, above all, one must not make judgments of inferiority or superiority, right? Why? Going to the outside, right? Making judgments is basically that same thing as success and failure. There's an end point, you make the judgment, and now you have a characterization of someone separate from yourself, right? So same thing. He says, so then he goes on, he says, one may get old, but why should one lose alertness and discrimination? Notice he goes through a lot of subjects, this particular questioner. He just, once one's out, he goes to the next question. He goes, well, consciousness and unconsciousness, while in the body, depend on the condition of the brain. I'm not sure I'd say it that way, but close enough. He says, but the self is beyond both, beyond the brain, beyond the mind. The fault of the instrument is no reflection of its user, which is to say that consciousness and its construction of the body mind, right? It's not a reflection of absolute awareness itself, right? That's what he's, the body mind is a reflection of the construction of consciousness, and consciousness is a reflection, if you will, if you want to use that metaphor. But the bottom line is that absolute awareness doesn't have any of these problems where the wheels fall off. And that's the point. That's the point he's making. So then he goes on, because now he's looking at his judgment about realized men and avatars, because maybe that'll save him. Maybe if he asks questions about people that he thought were perfect, that ought to get us there, right? So he said, I was told that a realized man will never do anything unseemly. He will always behave in an exemplary way. Now, of all the people to say that to, I can't imagine why you would say that to Nisargadatta, but hey, no problem. And there's a few others like that. UG Krishnamurti being probably one of the best examples of that. Like, I don't even half the time know what he's saying, other than I know if you want to find the epitome of a disruptor, he's your guy. So, um, but he goes on and he goes, who sets the example? Why should a liberated man necessarily follow conventions? The moment he becomes predictable, he cannot become free. He cannot be free. His freedom lies in his being free to fulfill the moment, to obey the necessity of the situation. Again, using the idea that there's an individual here to obey the necessity of the situation, rather than as we've seen before, where he would talk about simply being lived into the moment, where there's no individual that's being taken into account, right? He says, so the questioner comes back. He says, surely there must be a way of making out who has realized and who has not. If one is indistinguishable from the other, of what use is he? Right? Right. So here you come back again. Here's how we put the question of what use is it? Now that's about as American as it gets, right? I always loved, when I was philosophy, I did work in philosophy, and it was like America's crowning achievement is pragmatism, which means of what use are you? That was like, that was we didn't get into the grand philosophies like deconstruction and phenomena. I mean, we learned those, but those came from other countries. The thing that we were concerned about in American philosophy is of what use are you? So he comes back to that, and and he says, he that knows himself has no doubts about it. He doesn't care whether others recognize his state. Rare is the realized man who discloses his realization, and fortunate are those who have met him, for he does it for their abiding welfare. So there you go. Well, guess what? The questioner comes back and says, "Okay, now I got you. Let's talk about suffering." Right? He says, "I look around the world. When one looks around the world, we're appalled by the volume of unnecessarily suffering that's going on. People who should be helped are not getting help. Imagine a big hospital ward full of incurables tossing and moaning. Were you given the authority to kill them all and end their torture, would you not do so?" Now, Maharaj comes back and says, I'd leave it for them to decide. Which is really funny. And then he says, but if their destiny is to suffer, how can you interfere with destiny? And he says, their destiny is what happens. There is no thwarting of destiny. And then he goes on to say this, which is really an interesting thing. You mean to say that everyone's life is totally determined at his birth? What a strange idea. Were it so, the power that determines would see to it that nobody should suffer. Now, I believe he's saying that tongue in cheek, right? Because that leads you right off. But it does bring into question the pointer that we hear all the time. Ramesh would use the term, "Hey, it's already in the can," right? Whereas I also have heard, uh, you know, others say, "Wait a minute, it's kind of stupid to believe that it's all lived exactly as is," right? And here's where you get into dueling pointers, right? So, so one of the things to recognize here is that when you try to construct, say, metaphysics or philosophy out of pointers, right? What you're doing is you're trying to, in essence, crystallize a pointer so that it fits into a construction. But here's how it actually works. One of my favorite things in life is balance. Balance is a really cool thing. And I'm not sure. There's a couple, three ways to look at it. You could say that balance is when you're not falling in one direction or the other, right? Or you could say that balance is actually a state in which, right, one is in perfect position. But there's an old story which goes with this, and it's really wonderful with pointers. And in this particular village, there lived a man, and he was known as the world's best bicycle rider, right? And one day he said, "Hey, I'm going to do a service to the village, and I'm going to come out. I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach, and you can all watch how bicycling is taught. I'm going to, just reveal my secrets." So of course, newspaper reporters and people came from all over the country to come to this little village because the world's finest bicycle rider was going to teach. And so they got out there that day, and he says, "Well, let's find a 10-year-old child, and they found a young child, and they put her on the bike, right? So now, as he began to teach, you can see he's running behind the girl on the bike, and he's yelling at her, "Lean to the left, lean to the left, lean to the left," right? So what do you think appeared in the newspapers the following day? The secret of perfect bicycling revealed, lean to the left. And that's what happens when you take a pointer and you try to institutionalize or crystallize it, right? Because what you'll see, you can even see it, is that it depends on where the pointer is being delivered and where the acceptance within the crowd that's listening can handle it, right? That adjustment gets automatically made when consciousness speaks to consciousness. But I'm here to tell you that pointers do not, they just aren't uniform, and they don't agree with each other, right? One day it's in the can, right? So what's happening when Ramesh says it's in the can? Living is life's only purpose. Pure relaxation. So when you tell somebody how it's happening is already in the can, there's an inducing of relaxation. One doesn't have to worry about that anymore, right? But if one gets just silly stupid and comes from the other side, you're like, well, wait a minute, how could that be true? Right? And now you're basically telling them to lean to the right and not to lean to the left, because ultimately the place is in the middle. So recognize when you work with these pointers that that's what's going on. This is not a catechism. It is not internally consistent, right? That's not what's happening. So, um, all right. So now I got to figure out where I was. Yeah, here I am.
Yeah.
He
I
said,
find it interesting.
"Go
I'm
ahead."
sorry. I find it interesting that so many people perpetuate their own suffering in that when something really, really good is happening in life, one of the first thoughts that come to mind for so many is, well, this is never going to last.
Yeah,
And
of
it's gone.
course.
It's gone right then,
Yeah, yeah.
And when they're deep down into some grief or, there's this, oh man, when is that? I just, this is, and it perpetuates the length of that suffering. It's like
Yeah.
and it's like, so we just do that. But as humans, seem to perpetuate our own suffering.
Well, it's like the rock in the shoe, right?
Right.
You have a rock in your shoe. What's the only thing you can think about when you have a rock in the shoe, right? I got a rock in the shoe. It's right here, you know. And the minute the rock's out of the shoe, within nanoseconds, one has forgotten there was ever a rock in the shoe, right? That's the nature of human. But you probably are saying to yourself, "Man, I'm really comfortable." Yeah, that can't last long, as you said, right? There's going to be there's kind of a, I wish I was out of it. I wish I were in it, and that's the duality of separateness for sure, right? So he comes back, and he's and what he's doing throughout all of this is to go after, and he starts to go after, what you're saying, because he goes, he talks about, he goes, what about cause and effect? That's his next question, right? Now we've talked about that. I won't spend a lot of time on that. Um, but he does talk about suffering, and he says, still you are in favor of relieving suffering, even through the destruction of an incurably diseased body. And here's when he moves the pointer up a notch and says, um, again, you look from the outside while I look from within. I do not see a sufferer. I am the sufferer. I know him from within and do what is right spontaneously and effortlessly. I follow no rules nor lay down rules. I flow with life faithfully and irresistibly. That's how it looks like from the outside. So here he's mixing the individual with this sense of there is no individual, right? And he says, well, you seem to be a very practical man, in full control of your immediate surroundings. He goes, well, what do you expect me to be, a misfit? Which I would say he was, but no problem there. And he says, yet he says, you cannot help another much. And he goes, surely I can help. You too can help. Everybody can help. But the suffering is all the time recreated. That was what you were after, Diane. Man alone can destroy in himself the roots of pain. Others can help with the pain, but not with its cause, which is, all right, got this here, the abysmal stupidity of mankind. So that's the cause, right?
Gotta love that guy.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He goes, in a man, of course, he goes, will this stupidity ever come to an end? Now he could have just said no, but he actually lays it out. He goes, man, of course, any moment in an individual. He says, in humanity as we know it, after many years. He says, in creation, never. For creation itself is rooted in ignorance. Matter itself is ignorance. Not to know and not to know one does not know is the cause of endless suffering. So you remember when he talked to that fellow a couple weeks ago, and he came in and he got to that place and he asked him a bunch of questions about who he really was. And the man had come to a lot of satsangs, and finally he says, "Man, I don't know." He goes, "Now, oh, cool. Now we got something. Now we have somewhere to start with, right?" So that's what he's after here. He's going not to know, not to know, and not to know that one does not know, right? So the recognition that one does not know is always painted over, right? Is the cause of endless suffering, right? He says, okay, we're told that the great avatars, the great saviors of the world, and Maharaj said, did they save? They've come and gone, and the world plods on. Of course, they did a lot and opened new dimensions in the human mind. But to talk of saving the world is an exaggeration. And he goes, there no salvation for the world. This is really a great place to come to, right? And he says, which world do you want to save? The world of your own projection. Save is yourself, my world. Show me my world and I shall deal with it. I am not aware of any world separate from myself, which I am free to save or not save. Right? The purpose of life is living, right? That's it. There's no saving, no need. What business, then I always love it. I wish I were quick enough to have like these at my beck and call. But Maharaj says this one, and it always makes me laugh. He goes, what business have you with saving the world when all the world needs is to be saved from you? I'm like, damn, that guy's good. He says, get out of the picture and see if there's anything left to save. Right. So that's where he ends up on that one. He goes, so as I say, he goes on, he says the description and causation are the remedy for a disease caused by obtuseness and stupidity. Just like a deficiency disease is cured through the supply of a missing factor, so are the disease of living cured by a good dose of intelligent detachment. In other words, witness from the outside, right? So you cannot save the world by preaching counsels of perfection. People are as they are. Must they suffer? As long as they are as they are, there is no escape from suffering. Remove the sense of separateness and there will be no conflict, right? Comes back. He comes back and he gets into meaning, right? So the same thing. And in the end, he talks about dreams. And he says, all dreams are not equal, but the dreamer is one. But the dreamer is one. I am the insect, I am the poet in the dream. But in reality, I am neither. I am beyond all dreams. I am the light in which dreams appear and disappear. I am both inside and outside. Just as a man suffering a headache knows the ache and knows that he's not the ache, he says, so I know the dream, myself dreaming and myself not dreaming, all at the same time. I am what I am before, during, and after the dream, but what I see in the dream, I am not. And that brings us. There's another page of this, but you can see that that's really where this whole thing is headed, right? Now, I was talking about how things shift over time, and so the reason I wanted to juxtapose this to the pointers that Ramesh writes is that you can see how, as he's gone along, he started to collect a group of folks where he can say, hey, let's ask questions from a different place. Right. So in the next one, which is chapter 52, progress and spiritual search. Remember, he's talking about progress and spiritual search. And you notice that in the beginning, he really spent a lot of time talking about, look, progress is gradual, every step matters. He really attended to that. Right. Now notice what happens this time. Um, he says Maharaj is always ready to deal with the doubts and difficulties of seekers. He wants them to ask questions. But he warns, do not ask questions as a human being centered in a phenomenal object. Remember, I am not talking to individual entities, but as consciousness to consciousness about consciousness, right? So in 70, in the 60s and 70s, when I am that was pulled, right? He was still really operating, pulling people from the individuality and separateness, and he would go back to it and back to it and back to it. And he was they talk about his impatience, but when you read some of these, you're like, I wouldn't have made it as many questions in sometimes as he did. But, later, he basically wanted to up level what was going on. And so he said, hey, this is how I want you to ask questions. One of the foreign visitors who'd been coming for a long time said, perhaps I'm speaking from a body mind identity, but there is a question, a problem which has been troubling me for so long, I can't keep it bottled up any longer. I've talked to about some of the other seekers here, and I know they have the same problem. The problem is, how am I to know if there is any progress in my spiritual search? Right. Now, you already heard what he did the first time. We kind of have an idea how he tracks into that, right? Um, but this is what he goes. He says he sat still for some time. I like these descriptions because it gives you a little flavor. He goes, he sat still for some time, perhaps to get over the combined enervating effect of his illness. He was sick with cancer at the time, right? And the mental anguish at being asked the question. Then he began speaking softly, more in sorrow than anger. He says, I think I should stop talking altogether and put up a notice of that effect. I find that many of you come here as a matter of habit or for a new experience which your friends have mentioned to you. You really don't listen. If you did, such a question would not arise. That's not the response he had to the first guy, right? He he said, and if it did, you could have easily dealt with it yourself in, in case you had listened to me attentively and understood what I have been saying. Instead, I find that this question does disturb many of you. The problem apparently is about progress. Now, watch where he goes this time. Now, who is to make progress and progress towards what? Right? That's the bookend that's the purpose of life is living, right? The bookend of that, who is there to make progress and progress towards what? Right? Once the entity is dealt with, the apparent purpose of living becomes pretty clear, right? There's no one to succeed or fail. There's no object in the end. There's no purpose that lies from the movement, right? That happens. Actually, the living of life is the only purpose, or consciousness revealing itself to itself, as we said. He said, I have said repeatedly and entirely that you are the conscious presence, the animating conscious which gives sentience to phenomenal objects. You are not a phenomenal object, which is merely an appearance and consciousness of those who perceive it. Now, remember, we talked about it earlier. When you start to hear the concept of perceived, expand it, because most of us think it's just what I see. In other words, it's the concept that, like the leadership, you come in and drop a bunch and everybody thinks they've learned something, right? Watching is the watching of all of it, the tangibility, the emotion. Everything that arises in life is part of what is being perceived and watched, right? So awakening handles all of that, not just the mental revelation from which one thinks they can now proceed forward because they've received the what do they call them now? Downloads. I got the download. When somebody says that, I'm always like, okay. So you can tell I hung around not Nisargadatta. No, and this crowd. Um, he goes, how can appearance make so think about this. How can an appearance make any progress towards an objective? See, he felt that he had talked to them a lot about that. They should now at least be in that particular way of looking at things, right? He says, now instead of letting this basic apperception impregnate your very being, what you do is accept it merely as an ideological thesis, right? I got it. I got the ideological thesis and ask the question. How can a conceptual appearance know whether it is making any conceptual progress towards its conceptual liberation? Right? Maharaj took a matchbox in his hand and held it up. He asked, is this you? Of course not. Does it need time to understand that? No, our perception of this fact is immediate, is it not? Why should it take time to apperceive that you are not the phenomenal object called the body mind? Right? I'm not the matchbox. I'm not the body mind. Right? He sees it in this beautiful, pure simplicity. Right? That's how he sees it. He said, please understand apperception is prior to the arrival of consciousness, which is the basis of intellect. Apperception is not a matter of gradual practice. It can only happen by itself instantaneously. There are no stages in which deliberate progress is made, and there is no one to make any progress. Now that's pretty harsh because he hasn't said, well, if you see yourself as an individual, then every step matters and you're on a journey. And if you've taken 100 steps, you wouldn't call yourself a failure if you're only at step 76 and you're not right. He really worked hard to handhold this previous questioner. But you see now what he's doing is he's taking a stake and he's driving it into the heart. He's saying apperception is spontaneous. Um, so move yourself into that place where you no longer see yourself as the body mind and recognize yourself as simply a object being reflected into arising in consciousness, right? And that object doesn't have anything to do with what's actually happening. It simply is being lived as the happening occurs. That's what he's really after. He says, perhaps one wonders, and Ramesh used to say this, if you're in perfect relaxation and the apperception of awakening has not happened, why is that less perfect than if it has? He would always ask that question, which I always thought was a beautiful question. He says, um, perhaps one wonders, could it be that the surest sign of progress, if one cannot give up the concept, is the total lack of concern about progress and the utter absence of anxiety about anything like liberation or anything like liberation, a sort of hollowness in one's being, a kind of looseness, an unvolitional surrender to whatever might happen, right? So what's the difference if pure relaxation is the same as if that's the essence of the apperception, right? Then that's that, right? Now, that's one of the reasons. And I think everybody kind of finds their space, but I was highly influenced by that. Of course, being around Ramesh, I would hear that. And so when I would come back and work with people, and you all know I spent a lot of years doing leadership work. That's why you hear these stupid stories. But I thought to myself, if I'm taking a group of folks that haven't declared that they're on a spiritual search, right? But I know that they're on a search in the corporate world. There is a lot of searching going on. I used to call them really big engines with not a lot of navigational equipment because that's kind of how that world's put together. But being one of those myself, there was always this, how does one make the movement that needs to be made if you're in that context? If that's what you're teaching is into that context, how do you teach that? And for me, I came up with a sense of authenticity, right? Because pure relaxation into the identity, Joseph Campbell would talk about original myth, that the way an individual is formatted and constructed is perfect at birth, and then it gets all adjusted, as it were. But that by finding that perfect myth, that one could also find perfect authenticity, right? And I always thought, well, if if one can deliver teaching to whoever teaching is delivered to towards perfect relaxation, right? Now all is left to see is that one is absolute awareness and not the individual identity or body mind that one assumes themselves to see. The work is getting done. It's just getting done in a little bit of a different way than you might imagine, right? So you see that in the work that Maharaj and Ramesh, they came from that place, right? They came exactly from that particular place. They were after that pure relaxation. They didn't care. They came from both sides, which you're allowed to do. You start talking about absolute awareness in the corporate world, and you don't last long. But you can talk about authenticity all day long. So there's an avenue, right? So that's the avenue of teaching. So when one looks at teaching, I think the question needs to be asked, what's the magnetization here? What's being magnetized, and how does one then deliver into whatever that magnetization is? Because the entirety of our population, not everybody ends up in a group that goes to satsang and has gotten to this place where they're seeing the absolute awareness piece, right? But they are a part of life and they are making the same movement. So what can be added to that? So anyway, I digress, but that's my little input. Any questions? I had fun with that, by the way. I enjoyed this one. This was a I'm reading this thing and going, man, this guy does not give. I mean, and he was on to every subject. He went through and as I said, an entire toy box of but what about, but what about, but what about. So
A wild kind of hopscotch.
and it was really fun, because as I said, I mean, Nisargadatta is known for being so impatient, but he in a lot of what he does, he really handles a lot of it in a really nice way. So, any questions, comments?
I have a short comment only.
Okay.
As we're going through this, I'm seeing all the notes I made when I read this book on my own, and the things that you dwelled on to a large extent were the things that I focused on too, which was a little bit of a useful thing to see, And knowing you as long as I have and seeing how the way you teach us evolved too, my friend, man, this is a real pleasure. This is a real pleasure, buddy. So thanks.
Thank you. Uh, by the way, welcome, Don. We have is it Dan or Don? I'm sorry, I'm 73 in May, so my eyes. Dan, welcome, Dan.
Thanks. I used to go to Ramesh's in the 2000s.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Did you sit up at the little restaurant and then have a little bite to eat and then come down and get in the line across the street and go up you know?
I used to just go for the satsangs. I would, and
Yeah,
then once in a while I'd go to the little gathering afterwards,
yeah.
but yeah, but I've been kind of in the tantra world for the last 10, 15
Oh,
years. So,
nice,
so
nice.
Yeah,
You did
also
it the
Osho.
reverse. I went Osho first and Ramesh last.
I think, yeah, so it's really nice to be in this energy.
Well, thank
So
you.
yeah, I
Thank,
just stumbled upon the Facebook group, and then it said Zoom call. I said, "Oh, I'll jump on."
yeah, no,
So
thanks for coming in
yeah, you do this every so often.
every Thursday.
Oh, okay. Where are
We
you?
take a chapter, and I do it every Thursday. We put the chapters out and let everybody know, what chapters we're going to cover in any given, any given week. And so, it was actually highly motivated by what I was seeing and kind of the American version of how we were sorting out non-duality. Which kind of looked like a food fight with real weapons to me. And so, and that the satsangs, a la Ramesh or the ones you and I have experienced where, folks were actually, held, if you were, there was a holding that happened in that really wasn't when it got migrated to the US and to the West that seemed to have been stripped off. I'm who knows, but that's how the sense of things was to me. So I felt to in my dotage, I guess, spend some time. And Michael Richardson is the one. It was a brilliant suggestion. He goes, "Well, why don't you just teach out of I am that?" And I like you. I hung around Ramesh a lot and knew I used to go have tea with him. We were close, but the thing about it is if you were around Ramesh a lot, you were dipped in the waters of Nisargadatta. And so you had heard all the stories and you knew all of the things, and that was how it was. So it was a really brilliant suggestion because it gives you this really beautiful launching pad for each night's discussion. So yeah, every Thursday, and so it's our little kind of special version of how satsang is done, at least as I understand it. My guess is you'd probably run one pretty much the same way. So
Yeah, yeah, it's really great. Yeah, I just moved back to the States after being in Bali for about 4 or 5 years, and spent a lot of time in Asia and in India. Are you in Asia now? It looks very light out. Is it morning time for you where you're at?
no, it's actually 4:24 in the afternoon,
Are you in
and
Hawaii?
but it's so dark we have clouds in the sky. So
Oh,
and I rarely use them, but I turned lights on.
oh, really? It
Oh,
looks
so
natural
this
light.
is yeah. So I have light. It's actually if I turned it off, you might I don't. But it's dark here right now because it's overcast.
Oh, really? What time zone are you in? 4:25 or
Well,
5?
4:24 in the afternoon. So Hawaiian. I'm in Hawaii, so
Oh,
whatever
okay. Yeah,
Hawaii Standard Time, I think.
whatever that is. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
which is 3 hours from California, 6 hours. It's only. I'm sorry, it's 2 hours in California, 5 hours to the East Coast. When the time changes,
Right.
3 and 6. We don't change. We're the same. You know. And yet we feel the effects of it more than anyone because like we're kind of the tail that does not wag the dog.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to be in this energy. I'm gonna
Yeah.
definitely try to make it
Thank you
again.
for coming in. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
in. All right. Anything else, guys? All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll actually next time, Joseph and I had a conversation, and in which I told him I didn't exist. And so we'll delve into that next time. Joseph said, "Wait a minute, I want to go into that one further." So we'll get that up there. We'll get that one up there next time. So
Yeah, I wrestle with a lot of these concepts. So
right, and the beautiful thing is that the way he does it is really an amazing, uh, beautiful way of doing it. So we've been having conversations for years, and it's very sweet because you can tell when he's leaning into something and he doesn't quite get it, but at the same time he has this amazing ability to absorb. So it's a lot of fun, those conversations.
it is. I
Yeah.
agree.
All right, much love, everybody. We will see you next Thursday, same time.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I
Yeah.
haven't picked the chapters out, but I will, and they will post it on the page.